Thank you, Peter. I always love working with chaplains and pastoral counsellors and associates. And I was trying to think out last night why I enjoy it so much. I'm not an ordained person and I'm not officially with the church. I work with a secular university. But I think chaplains and pastoral counsellors and people like that, you're all boundary riders, you're outriders. You're sort of way out often on the perimeter. And that's very much how I feel. Michael Leunig is a good close friend of mine, and he refers to me as someone who works behind enemy lines, in the sense that my university is a very secular university. There's no religious studies, there's no theology department or anything like that. But I do try in my own way to engage in a sort of, I make education a form of ministry, in the sense that I try to draw out the spiritual life of my students. Peter said I taught spirituality at La Trobe. Well, actually that's slightly out of date. I did used to teach spirituality, but the dean decided it was surplus to requirements, Peter, and chopped it in 2009. So I sort of find that very disappointing. In fact, there is a real lack of connect in our country at the moment between, on the one hand, the importance of spirituality, and on the other hand, the way it's constantly discredited and undermined by people who don't understand its value and its meaning. Let me just start with two statements by very leading Australians, both of whom I disagree with. Cardinal George Pell, head of the Catholic Church in Australia, recently said, quote, "Spirituality is an unnecessary adjunct to faith." So there you go. Now you know. Spirituality is an unnecessary adjunct to faith. Not very encouraging. Margaret Throsby, in discussion recently with Michael Leunig, said recently, "Spirituality is not a matter of national public interest." That's what she said on ABC Classic FM. Spirituality is not a matter of national public interest. So with ideas like that, spirituality doesn't get a lot of positive airplay. That's the ABC and the church, both, I think, sort of out of touch a bit with this particularly important topic, which I'll be discussing now. And I work and write in several different fields, and some of you may have connected me with me or my work in one of these 5 areas. I work in spirituality and education, and I do a lot of conferences of education and teachers trying to bring spirituality into the curriculum. It's very difficult in our secular schools, less difficult with our religious schools, of course, but our secular state schools, high schools and universities are all very strongly secular, to such an extent that where I work at La Trobe in Melbourne, in the Constitution it states that anybody found proselytising or promoting religion can be summarily dismissed from office. So that's their very rigid views about it. La Trobe was set up basically as a Marxist feminist university, and it still is. So Leunig finds it funny, because he's a cartoonist and he finds everything funny, that I'm actually working there. And I'm one of the senior professors. I work in spirituality and health, and some of you have seen me in conferences on suicide prevention, depression, anxiety, and I have a training in psychology, as Peter said in his introduction, but I don't always use that training because I'm actually based in the English department in my university, partly because I find working in literature more conducive to spirituality than working in the field of academic psychology, which is very dry and I think quite sterile, frankly, especially when it comes to the spiritual side. So I work in literature because you can't divorce spirituality from people like Shakespeare and John Donne and Gwen Harwood and Les Murray and Tim Winton, the spirituality comes through very strongly in their writings. I work also in spirituality in land, and that's partly due to my upbringing in Alice Springs, as Peter also mentioned. I grew up alongside Aboriginal cultures, and that has stayed with me all my life. So a couple of my books, one called Edge of the Sacred and another, Re-Enchantment, is about the way in which Christianity and Judaism in this country might be able to begin a more rich relationship with or dialogue with Aboriginal religions. I also am interested in spirituality and society generally, as you'll see today, and spirituality in religion, which is the topic of today's talk.